first speaker today comes to us with an amazing list of credentials and accomplishments. Dr. Lawrence Edwards is intimately familiar with Kundalini Yoga and also a diverse array of meditation practices. He trained as a monk in India. He earned his PhD in clinical psychology in 1986 and went on to train in psychotherapy, biofeedback, neurofeedback, and hypnosis. He tailored some of his psychotherapy practice, especially for those having transpersonal experiences or awakenings. For over four decades now, meditation training has been a core part of Lawrence's work life, and he has spanned the globe in teaching. In the midst of this busy work life, he has also authored at least 2 books and 2 collections of very special verse. Lawrence's Optimal Mind website provides a very detailed and precise description of all his work and experiences. I asked Lawrence for a gem or two from his book, The Soul's Journey, and he sent me a chapter entitled Ascent to Union, which is a very provocative, kind of intriguing title. But I can report that it was a stirring experience reading that chapter to learn about Kundalini Shakti, about grace, and about our relationship with the divine by way of a very wonderful allegory, a highly symbolic story, which of course is our ancient way of learning, our ancient way of teaching and learning. I'm going to have to read the rest of the book, and I would recommend that to everybody. Remarkably, Lawrence also explained that story and the wisdom within it were gifted to him by Shakti during deep meditation, and he was urged to share it. With decades of deep study and spiritual practice, Lawrence is a true teacher and a guide for all those who are open to learn about their spiritual evolution. We're fortunate to have him here to talk to us. I'm excited to hear his talk. Lawrence, on behalf of all here, I welcome you and I hand the conference over to you. I will let you know as time draws to an end, and we'll leave a little bit of time for questions there. It's all yours.
Thank you, Patrick. What a wonderful introduction. Thank you all for having me here. I mean, ICR I've known for many years and have had Dale and Paul Pond and Terry and others to conferences when I was head of the Kundalini Research Network, and just a fabulous group, and the work that you're doing to make the seminal work of Gopi Krishna, who was such a leader in making the West aware of this ancient Shakti tradition and the teachings that are really eternal. So thank you for having me. Good to see old friends like Terry and others. A plug for Terry's book, you know, her new biography of Gopi Krishna, full of wisdom, insight, a profound work. I hope everybody gets it and reads it more than once. So great to be in her company again. So thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to shift now. I'm going to bring up a PowerPoint. So what I'm going to be talking about is the power of revelation in everyday life. And I'm going to be drawing on a couple of the books that I've written, The Soul's Journey, Guidance from the Divine Within, as well as the book Awakening Kundalini, The Path to Radical Freedom. The Soul's Journey is more of an archetypal, mythological, and very personal account of Kundalini and its workings. The Awakening Kundalini, The Path to Radical Freedom came about when Tammy Simon, the publisher of Sounds True, asked me to write a book that would make available many of these ancient and integrative teachings in a grounded way for people who may not have access to them. So I'll be touching on some of the things from those works, but you're welcome, obviously, to get them and go more deeply into it. I'm also going to be talking a bit about an article that came out in the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology last fall, and it's an analysis of spiritual awakening in a Kundalini tradition, the psychological change and spiritual growth. And I published that article with a dear friend and colleague, Dr. Marjorie Wollicott. She wasn't in on the original research, but she was absolutely invaluable to getting it published because the original research was done back in 1985 and 86. So it took some time to get it out into the public in this way, though I had written about it in the Soul's Journey book. So I'll be talking about that because in that article, it delineates the many changes that happen in the course of Kundalini awakening and unfolding in the everyday lives of people. And it was a study of monks living in an ashram, ordinary folks living in an ashram, as well as householders, people doing their sadhana and their practices in everyday life, and showing the extraordinary changes that happen over years with this process. Because one of the hallmarks of Kundalini yoga, the traditional ancient Kundalini yoga that unfolds after awakening, is that this spontaneous and continuous process of evolution is happening. And that's what also Gopi Krishna was talking about, how it evolves our consciousness so that we can perceive what's already here, the infinite, the divine, as everyone and everything. So I'll be getting into that as well. I want to talk a little bit first because I don't know, many of you are familiar with this, but in the future, as people watch this video, helpful to have a background. What is Kundalini Shakti? Kundalini is really a Sanskrit word referring to this innate power of consciousness to know the infinite as itself. So it's also known as the power of revelation, the power of the divine. That's inherent to each and every being. It's referred to as a goddess because she's also seen as the one who gives birth to all forms, not just the human form, not just consciousness. All forms are Shakti. So it's a radically different, monistic, non-dual way of perceiving this reality. And when we talk about what's awakening, we're usually talking about just this one aspect of Kundalini that then empowers us to know the infinitude as our own self. But there's another aspect of Kundalini that's already fully functioning and awake. That's your body, the energy of your body, the energy of every molecule and atom in your body, every thought in your mind, every pulse of your heart. That is too, is all Shakti, all Kundalini. And so really what the awakening that we usually refer to is talking about this other dimension that allows us to see that, to know that directly, to live that into the world, which is so important because it's living into the world through love and service that continues that process in our everyday lives. It also, that energy of consciousness begins to make us aware of the difference between our limited I awareness, our ordinary ego mind, and the universal self, the infinite, boundless consciousness, right? And that's really critical because most of us have just gone through life, just the I is I, it's me. That's all that's going on. And it can actually be very disconcerting for many people when this power is awakened and there's a whole other level of awareness now operating and operating through Kriyas. Kriyas are spontaneous movements of Shakti, spontaneous movements that are then moving through the body, the mind, all aspects of what we usually think of ourselves as both body. The Kriyas are the movement now of Shakti doing that. And this is what is often disconcerting for people because they thought, well, my hand only moves when I tell it to. And now it's doing mudras, it's doing beautiful things, all kinds of things are happening. Or you're going into spontaneous hatha yoga asanas, or you're doing other kinds of breathing changes. Suddenly you're flooded with insights and wisdom. These are all gifts of the Shakti. These are all the divine unfolding in everyday life in you as that power is clearing the obstacles that Michael was talking about for us knowing and evolving to the fullness of who we are. Shakti is also at the root of what's called viveka, discrimination. That's the ability to discern between what's our true self, our universal self, our infinite self, and this little ego mind that has taken on so much importance in our consciousness. And we have to be able to discern the two, because along the way, that ego mind is going to keep trying to trip us up. I'll be talking a bit more about that. But it's helpful to know How did we get into this contracted, limited state of I awareness, this limited being of consciousness that we call ego mind? And for that, the wonderful monistic ancient tradition of Kashmir Shaivism, one of the great Shakti Tantra traditions, helps to explain this, that really helps our mind be more at ease and at rest to understand how did I get into this state? Who did this to me? Well, the truth is, it's all the unfolding of the divine. And in this tradition, they look at this infinite Shakti and say, it really, you could start to discern kind of five powers. It's really only one power, but five facets, five faces of this power. The power to create, the power to sustain that creation, the power to dissolve it, the power to conceal, and the power to reveal. Those are the really extraordinary things that also it points to in the insight of how did we get to this state? Because the power of concealment, well, that's Maya Shakti that Michael talked about. Maya means measurable. It's sometimes referred to as illusory, but it really means measurable. It's how does the infinite, what's immeasurable, become measurable? Only by its own power to assume a measurable, meaning a limited, finite form. That concealment of its infinitude sets the stage for the production of an individualized mind, subtle body, and body. That's how we come to be in that contracted state. It's the infinite exploring what it means to be finite in all forms, to know that, to experience it. You are the infinite, knowing what it is to be you. Your eyes are the eyes of the infinite. Your every sense is the sense of the infinite. Knowing what it is to have your unique form and be informed by that. What's going to be added through awakening, this is the power of revelation, right? What's added for that is when that veil is lifted. These are symbolic terms, but what it is, it's now activating the power of the infinite to once again know its boundless nature, even while knowing its finite nature. It knows both and all that lies beyond that. So when we're talking about that, we can see, well, the self, that infinitude of being, reveals itself to itself. The power by which it does that is Kundalini Shakti. And there's a process of our individualized consciousness evolving over lifetimes to come to the point where it's ripe for that awakening. Right? And that's what happens in this process that's called this evolution of consciousness. Well, it starts out first with involution. But we were talking about consciousness infinity, the infinitude of consciousness becoming finite and exploring that. That's the power of involution. That happens first. So we become involved. We become all those finite things. Then, when we've explored that until we are done with it, we're so done with taking on form, we're starting to go, wait a minute, I remember there's part of me that's intuiting. That's already the stirring of the power of revelation. That, in its fullness, is awakening of Kundalini, also known as Shaktipat, descent of Shakti, descent of grace, descent of this power of revelation. What does it descend from? Your own self, within your own self. It's all happening within the self as the self. That then begins this other phase, the evolutionary phase. And these two phases, the involution is known as sovereignty. It means taking on form. The evolutionary phase is nivriti. It means dissolving forms, leaving all the forms behind in terms of just being a locus of identification. So we can then come back to knowing the infinitude of who we are. And that is what is all going to unfold through Kundalini awakening, this descent of grace, and that it can take many different forms, many different intensities. I've worked with thousands of people from around the world, and the most extraordinary to the most subtle and refined and almost unacknowledgeable ways that it awakens and then just begins this process of unfolding, as well as some that are very dramatic and some very troubling for people. but it initiates this process of total transformation. And the kriyas, the movements, the spontaneous ones, are the gifts of Shakti, the gifts of grace. It's cleaning up its system in ways that your mind could never figure out. It would never be able to do that. The famous Swiss psychiatrist, Carl Jung, part of my background and training was in Jungian psychology, he once said that awakening of Kundalini, it does the work of, and I think he just pulled the number out of his head, 600 years of depth psychology analysis. It just totally transforms things because it works on the very level at which they were all created and at the very level at which they need help, so that they can take us to this living form, what's called sahaja samadhi, living samadhi. It's the unity consciousness that then informs all our life. And it transcends and subsumes the three ordinary states that we're familiar with, the waking and the dream and the deep sleep states. Right? For many people, that's their whole life. You could describe it. Oh, they visited the waking state, the dream state, and the deep sleep state, and then that was that. There's a fourth state, the state of true meditation, of turiya, this transcendent state that subsumes those and also includes the infinitude of pure being. That's what Kundalini awakens us to. That is her natural state, is that state of Sahaja Samadhi. And in the Buddhist tradition, Buddha talked about this state as the only way he could refer to is the four immeasurables: boundless loving compassion, boundless wisdom, unshakable, boundless equanimity, and infinite, unbounded rapture, bliss, ananda. So the yogis, they talked about it as Satchidananda, Sat, pure infinite being, Chit, pure consciousness, Ananda, all-enveloping, rapturous ecstasy. So that's what we have sort of in store for us with this process. And it can unfold and sometimes can take more than a lifetime to unfold, but that's where it's directing us to. That's where it's carrying us to. And it can help us to then understand some about what's the inner terrain that we ordinarily deal with, because it's going to illuminate these in different ways. The four states of consciousness. Well, when we thought there was only three, then we take them as ordinary states. When they start to be illuminated by the wisdom that Kundalini is kind of imparting to your mind and body through the fourth state, you start to see the limitations of those states. You start to see more clearly how the waking, dream, and deep sleep state have various levels of limited eye awareness to it. The eye is very much identified with the body and the senses in the waking state, with the mind and that level of consciousness in the dream state. In the deep sleep state, considered the continuous awareness of nothingness, that's now referring to a causal body, a whole other level of consciousness that we're usually not able to be aware of. But Kundalini can start to illumine these states because, remember, meditation includes, subsumes, and transcends all of them. As that Kundalini's power of meditative awareness unfolds, well, then we can begin to be really awake meditatively in all those states. And we can see that the causal level of deep sleep, it's referred to as causal because it's associated with the causal body. That means, how did that imposition of limited eye awareness come to be? That is the cause of everything else. It's the cause of the subtle body, the mind, the senses. It's the cause of the physical body and all the karmas that go with both the subtle and the physical bodies. That causal body now becomes illuminated. You can experience this, and I've seen this in meditative states that carry you through the deep sleep state and illuminate now with a whole other consciousness. It also begins to illuminate the source of mantra as this sound form of the infinite that's very different than the ordinary thoughts that go through the mind. Mantra was revered and seen as one of the principal vehicles for conveying Shakti, Kundalini, because mantra is not mind-born. It's born of Shakti itself. It's what creates the primal sound of Om, and then the mantras that emerge out of that. So it's seen as sort of the royal vehicle for helping to sustain that consciousness throughout the day, throughout activities, and help it to unfold more and more fully and deeply, and dissolve, obstacles along the way. And when you look at the Sanskrit Om, which is the symbol on top, then interestingly, there's a visual form of that called a yantra. A mantra is the sound form of the divine. A yantra is the visual form of the divine. The ancient yogis said, oh, Om looks like this. This is the vibratory essence of Om. And that Sri Yantra was drawn thousands of years ago as a manifestation of Om. Well, fast forward some thousands of years, and when we get to the 1950s, and an instrument called the tonoscope was invented, and it's a membrane on which a fine powder vibrates. Well, when they chanted Om through this, it produced Sri Yantra. That is the vibratory equivalent of that. That is the vibratory mechanism by which the infinite becomes finite. It's through vibration. And it's why it reverses that through mantra. That's a way of coming back to that infinitude. So here's the sound form of consciousness manifesting a physical form. Very different than what our ordinary mind and ordinary science tends to look at. Albert Einstein once said that, reality is an illusion, albeit a persistent one. Well, it's Kundalini Shakti that lets us see past that illusion. And along the way, she illuminates that little ego mind that we've become so identified with. It's created by the infinite. There's nothing really wrong with it. It just shouldn't dominate our consciousness. And identification with that limited eye awareness is seen as the cause of pain. It's known as avidya, this root ignorance. It's the root obstruction that then creates the emptiness through which people flailing about in that terrible state of being divorced from the infinitude of being, then try and consume the planet, dominate others, exploit this and that. It's all out of that identification with this limited structure that we call the ego mind. And it's also, by the yogic tradition, it's defined as the power of self-appropriation, because it appropriates things to itself. It identifies with it and says, consciousness, oh, that's me. I have consciousness. Well, the yogis discovered, no, the ego has no consciousness. It's a construct. That's why they symbolized it by the moon. The moon has no light of its own. It only shines by the reflected light of the sun. So even in its full state, the luminous moon, that's often the enlightened mind, symbolized by that, it's still not the sun. The sun is your infinite being, your true self. So Kundalini Shakti is going to transform the ego mind, let you know the truth of who you are, and transform the ego mind so that it can serve the infinite, serve the divine, serve your loving heart. That's the living presence of the divine. And so when we look at the classic depiction of the chakras, well, then we can see that's just a way of depicting the stages of evolution happening. So involution, consciousness condenses from the infinite down to the most finite, the earth realm, the Muladhara chakra. In evolution, it's released from the bounds of that level of consciousness to ascend again. And that's what the ascent to union was all about, that Patrick was talking about, because when I was doing my research in the 1985-86, Kundalini gave me this extraordinary vision of an archetypal mythic journey of Kundalini through the chakras, then symbolized by cities, and how they operate as domains of consciousness. Now, it's much too much to go into here, but I've made it freely available. So you can email me if you want it. It's also on the soulsjourney.com publication page. Free download. It's about a 43-page booklet, PDF. Everybody's welcome to it. Everybody's welcome to share it. It was a gift of Shakti. So please enjoy it. And perhaps it will inspire or inform something about your life. When we come now, part of that research that I was doing at the time, in which this tale of the Ascent to Union didn't quite fit in an academic dissertation, that wound up being my doctoral research that was completed in 1986 and then published in 2022. And in that research, it showed that there were 7 broad categories of transformation that happened with individuals. And these were people who were long-term practitioners, meaning they had practiced within an awakened Kundalini system for over 10 years. And I was looking at both swamis, people who were taking the vows of renunciation, people living in ashrams, and people who lived their everyday lives as mothers and fathers and business people and whatever. And it was remarkable the absolute similarity across whatever that form of life they were taking. Kundalini was transforming everything within. And there were physical changes, there were emotional changes, there were mental changes, relational, conceptual, attitudinal changes in values and priorities. I'm going to talk a little bit more about them in a minute. If you're interested and you can't find that online, again, please just email me and I'll get that to you. And actually, there's much more detail in that that is in the dissertation itself. That's online. Again, if you can't find it, you're welcome to contact me about it. But what's happening, Kundalini is revealing the fullness of what it is to be a human being. Not just the physical body, not just the mind, the fullness of what it is to be human, which is both the infinite divine as well as the finite divine. Einstein wrote, "A human being is a part of the whole called by us the universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison, widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty." So Einstein, he's talking about drawing on this infinite power of consciousness, talking about it in a different way, but that's what it is. This power of consciousness is known across all spiritual traditions. We can call her Holy Mother. We can call her the Holy Spirit. We can call her Grandmother Spirit, Shekinah, Bridget, all kinds of names across traditions, producing the same profound transformation in sages and saints across traditions. The Nobel laureate Erwin Schrödinger wrote, "The total number of minds in the universe is one. In fact, consciousness is a singularity phasing within all beings." So even the sort of the masters of physics reach that realm where they start to see, what's this true nature of consciousness? What is this? Because that's where Shakti Kundalini, that's where it wants to take us to. In the great 8th century sage Shankaracharya wrote, he was already considered an enlightened sage when he experienced Kundalini awakening. So you'd go, what else was there? Kundalini awakening was known that it incorporated everything. It wasn't just a conscious sort of cognitive level of awakening. It incorporated the entire body, all of existence. And after having that ecstatic breakthrough experience, he wrote this ecstatic poem called Sundarya Lahari. And he also wrote a poem on the 6 stanzas of liberation called the Nirvana Shatkam. And the refrain of that is Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. It means I am Shiva. I am Shiva. I am consciousness and bliss. I am Shiva. I am consciousness and bliss. The great sage Buddha in the Heart Sutra describes a similar kind of thing in terms of it's not this, it's not the world, it's beyond everything. It's not your ordinary sense of perceiving. There's no path, there's nothing. That fullness of being is beyond anything you can conceptualize. Come to know that. And then he gave this great mantra for surpassing the mind. Gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhi, swaha. Means gone, gone, gone beyond, completely beyond. Hail the Bodhi, the enlightened one. That's you. Ah, so mote it be. You know, that's that invocation and summoning of the truth of who we are, so we can live that into the world. Because that's what we're called upon to do. And, you know, through my work, I've had the privilege of being able to work with people and hear their experiences in many different avenues and venues of life. I'm going to talk a bit about this now. I'm putting this up as this is the end slide in case you need contact information you can refer to later. But I'm going to end the screen share now and come back to this. Now I get to see some of you folks, and it's good to see everybody again. So, you know, when we're talking about this profound power of transformation and how it manifests in everyday life, I mean, one of the things I saw several, well, now it's decades ago, I was involved in the work with a nonprofit yoga foundation, establishing a project for going into prisons and teaching and making the Shakti tradition available to inmates. And it was remarkable to me. I'd be going into these federal penitentiaries in the United States. And I remember asking my teacher, well, how are we going to bring the Shakti into these? These are terrible situations. And he said, mantra, mantra. It's all about mantra. And you as a practitioner, he said, he says, it's not just like viruses and the flu is contagious. Shakti's contagious. You carry that wherever you go. And you can see this with so many people. People start to light up around the Shakti. It's contagious. And the mantra serves as that vehicle. So I'd go into these, you know, terrible situations with, you know, carrying my little harmonium and go in to chant mantras and do meditation and see these stunning effects that it was having on people. And so one time I was in this federal penitentiary and a male facility, and we were always given the most ratty room they could find because they weren't really, you know, very kind to us trying to help the inmates. But I'd go in, we'd chant and change the whole atmosphere. And one time we're chanting, and I'm chanting this slow chant of Om Namah Shivaya, this Maha mantra from a Shakti tradition that has that power to really radically transform the mind, body, everything. And we're sitting there, and there's these inmates, and there was one inmate who I had been warned, had a particular reputation for violent acting out, but he had been coming and everything was fine. Now, this was a room where there were vending machines in the back of the room, and guards used to come in and interrupt us just to be difficult. And they'd come in, and, you know, when you throw a quarter into a machine, and then the camera come rattling down, and we're chanting and meditating. So they're getting their jollies out of disrupting this. So this guard comes in, like they have done in the past, does that. And it's funny, he takes the can. I'm sitting, you know, playing the harmonium, chanting with these guys, and he's back in the room. And I see he pauses. And he goes to a chair and he sits down. Now, this is very rare. Guards and inmates don't mix. They don't do things together. They don't hang out together. So he sits there for the whole time. And at the end of the chant, he continues to sit. At the end of meditation, I would chant a few rounds to help people come out of meditation. He gets up and starts to leave. As he gets up to leave, that inmate who had the history of violence gets up and walks towards him. And I go, oh, I wonder what's going to happen here. It's all in the hands of the divine. Back of the room, they exchange a few words, and the guard leaves. The program ends, and the inmate comes up to me, and he goes, "You know, I don't know what this stuff is about, but um, I had a fight with that guard in the yard earlier today. Well, not a fight, argument, and something was going on. This chant, this meditation. I felt like I had to go up and apologize to him. And he was talking to me alone because he didn't want anybody else to hear that he would apologize to a guard. That was not a good thing. And he goes, I couldn't believe it. And then he said, and the guard was that guard who came in said, he says, what are you doing here? I never experienced anything like it. I came in just to give a soda and, kind of give you guys a hard time. And next thing I know, I just need to sit here. He says, it's remarkable. That's Shakti. That's Kundalini. That's the unfolding of that in everyday life. If that can happen in a prison, if people can step outside their bound egos of the role of a prisoner, the role of a guard, the whole context, who can't be freed by this extraordinary power? Another event that happened in that same prison, suddenly a new inmate showed up, and there was a clinical psychologist who was sponsoring the program. He started coming because he heard it was so great. And he recommended a fellow because there's a lot of high blood pressure, uncontrolled blood pressure, because it's such a stressful environment. So he referred a fellow to this meditation program on Sunday nights. I was just going in as a volunteer. And he had high blood pressure, uncontrollable. So this guy comes in, he's really tight. And over the next few weeks, you can just see his countenance softening, and just helping to release and let go. And, prison groups, these are not touchy-feely sharing groups. You often have to sort of just see what's going on. And he was clearly changing. And then the clinical psychologist told me, his blood pressure is normalized, and he actually even was able to go off medication. That's how dramatic. All he was doing was he was given the practice of meditation with the empowered mantra, Om Namah Shivaya, and that's what was changing him. So after a couple of months go by, at the end of one of the programs, he comes up to me and he said, yeah, I'm being transferred. It's another thing, in the prison system transfers guys around just to stress them out. He says, I'm being transferred. And he says, but I have to tell you what's happened to me here. He said, I came here. He said, I'm serving life sentence without parole. He'd already been in prison for 16 years. He was only 32. Right? He said, I've been called everything under the book, and that's what in the book, and that's what the guards tell me every day. What a fuck up I am, what a piece of crap, everything. And he says, you know what? That's been true. That's been true. He said, but you came in here and you told me something I'd never heard. He said, you told me I'm divine. There's divine. The divinity is within me. And you gave me a means of some way to get in touch with this mantra. He says, I don't know from mantra. I don't understand half of what you say. He said, but I got nothing here. So I latched onto mantra and I went back to my prison cell and I just started doing this Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, day and night. And he said, and he started to describe his prison cell becoming illuminated by blue light. And he was showered by that light. And he began having experiences of who he is beyond anything he'd ever done, beyond the body, the mind, anything. And he says, I go into these states. He says, I don't even know, I can't even describe them. I don't know what this is about. He said, but I have to tell you, I'm freer now in prison than I've ever been in my life. And he said, you know what? The guards, they're going to continue to call me all those names. And I belong here for what I did. I'm accountable for that. He said, you know what? I never have to believe that's who I am anymore. I know the truth of who I am. That's the unfolding of Kundalini Shakti in the moment, in everyday life. It brings us to that over and over, and then empowers us to realize what's our true calling. What's the purpose of a human birth? It's twofold: to know the infinite as ourself in all beings, and to serve that in the world every moment with every breath. That's what we're called to do. And it's in that context that that happens. And it brings to mind an experience I had back in the early 1980s. I was running an inpatient center in Connecticut. And I had been studying with Muktananda Swami, and I'd been to India and doing my sadhana practices even while I was running this institute. And the acute care unit, there was all these problems with the staff, I was given the task of do something about this. And I tell you, my teacher used to tell me, see God in each other, see God in each other. I swear every time I looked, I didn't see God. I saw these troubled people and fighting and petty ego stuff, and I was not seeing God. And I said, how am I going to do this? I need to be able to do this. So I took it on as a task. And I said, as I contemplated, I said, I can't see them as God, but I can serve them as God. So I decided, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to invite them all to my house, and I'm going to serve them as God. So I invited them to my house on a Friday evening for dinner. I took the afternoon off, and all the time I was saying, I'm going to cook God dinner. God's coming to dinner. I'm going to make soup. I'm going to bake bread. I'm going to make an apple pie. I did everything all the time, saying mantra, envisioning God's coming to dinner. That's what I'm doing. This is my seva. And so, all the staff come to my house. Some were a little nervous. They'd never been there before. Go to the boss's house for dinner. We all settled down, and everybody's sitting around the table. I said, no, I want to serve you each. So I got up and started, serving the soup I had made. And I'd bring it to the table. I'd go back and get another bowl. And I turned to the table, and where each person had been sitting, there was just this golden orb of light. The divine, scintillating right there as each and every one of these people. I was overwhelmed. Tears started raining down. Then I went, wait a minute, this is my staff. I turned back to the stove and try to regain my composure here. There's time for ecstasy and there's time for serving the soup. It's time to serve the soup. So, so I did it. And it was magical. The night, though we talked about nothing related to that, the whole dynamic of the staff, my relationship to them, the relationship of them to each other was all transformed because of that kind of change. Changed my vision. It also changed what was going to be able to come through me to heal, to uplift, to transform. That's how we then live in service in these many, many ways that each one of our lives affords us this unique opportunity where we walk that love, that consciousness, that compassion into the places we've been given in our lives to walk that in. That's what we're called to do. That's the calling of Shakti. Know the fullness of who you are, see it in all, and be a mirror of that. So that's where it takes us. And when I was doing the research and looking at the many different kinds of changes that happen in the course of people's sadhana practices, I mean, they were extraordinary. And the things that people would talk about, when we talk about physical changes, well, physical changes included everything from dietary changes to decreased needs of sleep, increases in energy, changes and improvements in health, sharpening of senses, being able to perceive things more clearly, whether it was visually or auditorily, and processes of physical purification. So the kriyas that would happen, the spontaneous movements that were associated with it. Not everybody had them, but many did. Huh? And then there were emotional changes. And many of these had to do with getting free of the contracted states of emotion that go with the ego mind, anger, irritability, reactivity. When you look at Kundalini processes and the spontaneous process that unfolds, two of the most disruptive emotional states that we get into that disrupts the natural flow and evolution of consciousness, anger and fear. Anger and fear. These are so disruptive. And even when somebody's having a transpersonal experience spontaneously from a gift of Shakti, if it invokes in them fear, if it invokes in them irritability, anger, why doesn't it go away? Why is it doing this? Why didn't it come back? All those kinds of things further disrupt that. We really, in sadhana, that's one of the things that gets confronted. How do we get free of anger and fear? Because that's part of the knot that goes with the ordinary ego mind. That is its contracted state because it's born of the deficiency that the ego mind is born of as well. And we have to get through that. And so those spontaneous changes of just emotions dropping away. Can't tell you how many people would tell me, oh, I was doing that. I used to be a rageaholic. I'd get on the highway and I'd be mad at this and I'd be mad at the traffic light. Now just Om Namah Shivaya comes up. Oh, just the mantra, Om Kalima, starts arising. And I'm fine. What does it matter? Red light, no light, this light, whatever. Huh? These kinds of in the moment changes that shift our consciousness. It doesn't have to be that it always just shifts into universal love and light. No, these transformations of the vehicle of mind are so important for being able to transform everyday life. There were various mental changes that people reported, a quieting of the mind, many fewer thoughts, and times entering states that were completely thought-free. The thinking mind cannot create a thought-free state. The thought-free state is a gift of Shakti. It's a gift from beyond the mind. When she absorbs all that the mind wants to produce, becomes still, and finally can know that rest that surpasseth understanding. That's that state of peace that isn't mind-born. It's the state of your true self. It's the state of your divine nature. They also would report, how much stronger and more disciplined their mind became. Creativity was another one. The creativity that arises, Gopi Krishna spoke about as well. That also Shankaracharya in that Sundarya Lahari poem, he then said, Kundalini, that's the basis of all inspiration, all creativity, all thought. Everything arises out of Shakti Kundalini. And when the instrument is clear and purified, then that pure light of that then reveals itself in one's creativity and what's being expressed. It all comes through that. That's what we're invited to participate in. Kundalini is this, open invitation to know the infinite as yourself and revel in that and see it in everyone's eyes, everyone's countenance, in the world around us. This is what we need. No more divisiveness, no more enemies. The only enemy has been what the mind has created. It all gets dissolved in true knowing. People would talk about relational changes, and that how much that changed their relationships with their children, their spouses, co-workers, because now this whole transcendent experience of being something other than just the ego mind. Because what usually disrupts our relationships? Well, we get contracted. We get caught up. I want this. I want that. I didn't get this. I, me, mine. Oh, when you start to be able to both see the ego is doing that, you start to be able to pull back from it. And now you're beginning to get this influx of the wisdom to see past it and see, wait a minute, how am I called to bring love into this situation? How am I called to bring wisdom into this situation? Maybe if instead of jumping to do something like the ordinary mind does, what if I encounter this situation with some stillness, some peace, some silence? Those are gifts of the Shakti, taking away the conditioned mind and all its conditioned reactivity. Otherwise, that's what we're living now, the conditioned mind, moment by moment, and all the reactivity that goes with it. That's why people can push our buttons. Well, what's a button? It's just a conditioned mind. She unwires it all. No more buttons. Free. How else are you going to get free? The mind can't do that. Can't pull its own buttons. You can't jump over your own shadow. That's the work of Shakti.
Lawrence,
Yeah.
5 minutes to go.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. We're enjoying.
All right. Good. So those kinds of changes, people talked about, again, improved work relationships, improvements with their relationships with children. This was really interesting, especially for, obviously the householders. Monks didn't have kids. But everything from better communication, more shared activity, finding their children and what they're doing to be, so expressive of the unique state that a child is in. Don't we want to join them in their brand new look at the universe? Aren't we being like what Christ said, be like a child to come unto God? Well, why not be like the child who's in your house and see through their innocence, see through their eyes, see what wisdom they're imparting? What if your child came to teach you, not you teaching them, right? All these kinds of opening changes in people's perspectives so they can see reality with fresh eyes, made fresh, renewed by Shakti. Conceptual changes is another big category. Shifts in notions and experience of what God is or is not. Meister Eckhart, the great Christian mystic, he said, the last obstacle to God is God. What do you mean? Your concept of God. If you have any concept of God, it's in the way, right? Because now you're looking for your concept. You're not looking for God. You're looking for affirmation of your belief. You're looking for any kinds of things. No, God is beyond all of that. To know God is to see beyond that. That's why St. John of the Cross, the great Christian mystics, right? Again, Holy Spirit, Shakti working through him, gave him a vision, he said, of what it is to see through God's eyes. Right? And he said, when I saw through God's eyes, I saw all God sees is himself. All God sees is himself. The divine sees the divine. This is the unfolding of the divine. This is the gift of Kundalini Shakti, to see the divine unfolding as all that is, including all that you are, and then to participate in that, knowing it fully, loving it fully, being present with it fully. That's what we're invited to. That's the gift of fully unfolded Kundalini Shakti. So her gifts are magnificent. They're really, in the end, unspeakable. Better to just be still and dissolve into that love, into the loving embrace of the divine, to know that every moment of every day. That's her gift. That's what she has in store for everyone. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of her gifts with you.
Lawrence, thank you very much. I was watching on the side to see whether there was questions coming up, and I think everybody was so deep in listening to you and wanting to hear everything that you said that we were so busy that no questions came up. But for me personally, you've certainly given me a whole lot to feel and think about.
Good.
Yeah.
There's
Sure.
so much. And as I say, that Ascent to Union that you referred to, freely available through my website or email me. Much more in those couple of resources in the books. thesoulsjourney.com is the website that has links to many, many resources, including free videos and podcasts and interviews that people have done with me. So anything I can make available to pass on freely, that's what I do. And when I created the Anamkara Meditation Foundation as a nonprofit, its one mission was to make these kinds of empowered meditation practices freely available to everyone. So Thank you for giving me an opportunity to do that.
Well, we've certainly been very fortunate to have you here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.